Good morning/afternoon/evening, everyone. Today, I'd like to invite you to consider a paradox that most of us encounter, yet rarely discuss. We live in a world that celebrates the loud, the visible, the measurable. Milestones, accolades, public recognition, they're everywhere. But what if I told you that some of the most profound victories happen in complete silence? What if the deepest, most enduring progress is, by its very nature, invisible? Let's explore this. We live in a time where visibility has become the currency of progress. Everywhere we turn, we are encouraged, if not conditioned, to showcase our achievements, to document our every win, to measure our worth through likes, metrics, and public affirmations. This creates an illusion that the only progress that matters is the progress that others can see. But when we step back and look at human development through the lens of psychology and neuroscience, a very different picture emerges. The reality is that most meaningful progress begins in ways that are completely invisible to the outside world. It's the kind of progress that doesn't announce itself. It happens in the micro decisions you make when no one is watching. It's forged in the early mornings, the quiet evenings, the spaces where your discipline meets your discomfort. These are not the moments that make it to social media. These are not the moments that get celebrated. And yet, they are the exact moments that determine whether or not your external success will be real, sustainable, and rooted. There is a reason why many of the most fulfilled, high-performing individuals do not chase the spotlight. They understand something most people overlook. External validation is fleeting. It can never keep pace with the depth of internal evolution. If your progress is only validated when it's visible, you've built a fragile system. A system that depends on others to tell you you're doing well. But if your progress is invisible, if it's anchored in your own rituals, your own sense of alignment, you've created an anti-fragile system. One that cannot be taken from you by opinion, circumstance, or trend. When you begin to orient your life around invisible progress, you start to realize that loud success is often a byproduct, not the goal. True success, lasting success, is quiet at first. It whispers before it roars, and more often than not, it's only visible to the person who is doing the work. In the modern era, we have been conditioned, almost neurologically programmed, to equate progress with visibility. Our brains are constantly being fed signals that tell us, if no one sees it, it doesn't count. Social media, performance reviews, external metrics. They create feedback loops that reward not the process itself, but the appearance of progress. And yet, when we look at the way real, lasting change happens within the human nervous system, it tells a completely different story. True progress is often subtle, quiet, and deeply internal. It takes place within the circuitry of the brain long before the world ever gets a glimpse of it. Neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable ability to change and adapt, doesn't care if someone else is watching. It doesn't require applause. It responds to repetition, to focus, to effort applied over time. The rewiring of the brain, whether it's building a new skill, breaking a pattern, or strengthening discipline, happens beneath the surface, invisible to the outside world. This is the paradox of human development. The most powerful transformations are often invisible until they become undeniable. But we live in a culture of immediacy. The dopamine loops of likes, comments, and recognition have conditioned us to chase fast, visible wins. And when we don't see them, or when others don't see them, we assume we're falling behind. This is not just a psychological trap, it's a neurochemical one. It hijacks our attention, our motivation, and our sense of self. It makes us more reactive, more anxious, more focused on optics than substance. The myth of loud success is dangerous because it pulls us out of alignment with how growth actually works. It distracts us from the real work, the kind that is slow, methodical, and often lonely. The kind that builds neural pathways brick by brick, with no audience, no immediate feedback, and no external reward. And yet, ironically, this is the kind of work that, over time, leads to the most sustainable and authentic forms of success. When we untangle ourselves from the need for our progress to be seen, we begin to create from a place of integrity. We shift from performing for the world to building something inside ourselves that is immune to trends, immune to opinions, immune to external timelines. That's where the real power is, not in the noise of public validation, but in the quiet certainty that you are evolving, regardless of whether anyone else notices. And what's fascinating is that, eventually, when the roots are deep enough, the results become so solid, so undeniable, that they speak for themselves. By then, you no longer need them to, because you've already won the battle that matters most, the one within yourself. There is an almost universal belief in our society that progress must be loud to be valid. We are surrounded by highlight reels, endless streams of curated achievements, and narratives that imply that if your growth isn't visible, it isn't real. This belief is not just cultural, it becomes embedded in our biology over time. Our brains are wired to seek social belonging, to look for signals from the tribe that we are moving in the right direction. And those signals, in today's world, often come in the form of external validation awards, recognition, status markers. But this creates a dangerous distortion of what success truly is. It tricks us into focusing on the scoreboard instead of the game, on appearances instead of substance. It creates what behavioral scientists call an extrinsic motivation loop, where our drive to act is tethered to outside rewards rather than intrinsic purpose. And when we do this, we bypass the natural, often invisible processes that drive real change inside the brain. Neuroplasticity does not operate on the timeline of social media. It does not care about optics. It is slow, it is patient. It requires friction, effort, and, most critically, consistency over time, regardless of whether anyone notices. The brain is constantly adapting to where you place your attention and effort. And the most valuable adaptations happen when you are working in the dark, when you are practicing a skill at the edge of your competence, when you are facing yourself in moments of discomfort, doubt, and repetition. These moments do not generate applause. They do not show up in your feed, but they are where mastery is built. The myth of loud success convinces us that progress is linear, glamorous, and should be broadcast at every step. But progress is rarely linear. It is non-linear, messy, and filled with setbacks that are, by design, meant to teach us. When we try to skip this process or rush it for the sake of optics, we create fragile success that crumbles when conditions change or when the applause stops. The most enduring, anti-fragile forms of success come from a different place altogether. They come from locking in on your own process, your own standards, your own internal scoreboard. When you detach your growth from the need for it to be seen, you free yourself from the neurochemical addiction to external praise. You reclaim your focus. You lower the cognitive load that comes with constant comparison. And you begin to orient your nervous system towards sustainable effort, regardless of outcome. In this state, you begin to experience something rare. You find joy in the doing, not the showing. You find reward in the repetition, not the recognition. And over time, this creates an inner robustness that cannot be faked, cannot be taken, and does not require an audience to exist. That is the death of the myth of loud success, and the birth of something much deeper, much more enduring, invisible progress. One of the most misleading beliefs that infiltrates our thinking, often without us noticing, is that success should be loud, obvious, and measurable by others. This belief is reinforced by the environments we live in, where visibility is mistaken for validity, and where the absence of recognition is interpreted as the absence of progress. But the human brain, when understood through the lens of neuroscience, tells a different story, one that reveals the danger of outsourcing our progress to external validation loops. At the core of our biology is a system wired to notice what others reward. Our ancient wiring favors approval from the group because, for much of our evolutionary past, social rejection meant death. That wiring persists today, except now the tribe is not a village. It's the global stage of social media, corporate hierarchies, and comparison culture. And this creates a distortion where we start chasing what looks like success instead of focusing on what feels like growth. This is where the myth of loud success begins to erode our potential from the inside out. Because the truth is, real progress, deep, lasting progress, darts in the shadows. It begins when you commit to actions that feel invisible, even thankless, when you decide to put in the work that no one else will see. And that's not just philosophy, it's biology, neuroplasticity, the process by which the brain reconfigures itself to new patterns, does not occur in moments of applause. It happens during the hard, often unsexy repetition of skill, building, mental training, and emotional regulation, all of which take place internally, beyond the view of any audience. This creates a beautiful but challenging paradox. The progress that truly changes you happens long before the world notices, and by the time they do, you no longer need them to, because the person you become through invisible work is no longer motivated by visibility. You've recalibrated your system to find satisfaction in the process itself, but if we remain seduced by the myth of loud success, we risk becoming performative versions of ourselves. We lose touch with the deep, internal signals that tell us when we are on the right path. We start chasing optics, we start comparing, and comparison, as research shows, activates neural pathways associated with scarcity and threat detection, leading to anxiety, overwhelm, and burnout. In this state, our nervous system becomes reactive, fragmented, distracted by what others are doing, instead of deeply connected to what we are building. To break free from this trap, we must learn to fall in love with the silence of our own progress. We must retrain our attention to notice the invisible victories, the day you showed up despite resistance, the small behavioral change that no one else saw but you, the moment you chose discipline over comfort, knowing no one would ever congratulate you for it. These are the moments that shape your identity at the neural level. These are the wins that are invisible to the world, but undeniable within you. And over time, the compound effect of these invisible wins creates the kind of mastery, depth, and inner certainty that no loud success can ever replace. This is the quiet revolution, the dismantling of the myth of loud success, the embrace of invisible progress as the truest, most sustainable path forward. The obsession with visible progress is not simply a cultural artifact. It's a deeply ingrained cognitive bias that quietly governs much of our behavior. We are pattern-seeking creatures drawn to evidence we can see, measure, and compare. In our pursuit of growth, this creates a dangerous dependency on signals that are external to us: certificates, milestones, recognition from peers, or even statistical metrics that tell us we are on the right path. But what's often missed is that these markers of success are lagging indicators. They reflect past effort, not present transformation, and if we anchor our self-worth to them, we risk abandoning the very process that created them in the first place. Our brains are wired to seek shortcuts. We want progress to feel linear, visible, and efficient, but the biology of human growth doesn't work that way. Neuroplasticity, the silent architect of all skill acquisition and behavioral change, operates on a different timeline. It builds slowly, subtly, often in imperceptible increments that feel like stagnation to the conscious mind. In fact, the moments when you feel like you're making the least progress are often the periods when your brain is doing the most rewiring, deep structural adaptation that takes time to surface into noticeable gains. This is why the myth of loud success is so deceptive. It convinces us that if no one sees our efforts, they hold no value, that if progress isn't quantifiable today, it's not happening. This is a dangerous illusion because it can push us to abandon the slow, disciplined work in favor of performative busyness, activities that look impressive but lack the depth to create real transformation. Many of the most impactful breakthroughs in life and in science occur in obscurity. They come from the invisible, patient hours where no one is cheering you on, where the only audience is your own conscience. This is not romanticism. It's the way the nervous system learns. Repetition without immediate reward is what builds the myelination of neural pathways, the strengthening of synaptic connections, the quiet expansion of your capacity to handle discomfort, complexity, and challenge. Yet, because these processes are invisible to the naked eye, they rarely feel gratifying in the moment. That's where many people falter. They seek the validation that comes from external progress markers, not realizing that the deepest form of progress is often felt as discomfort, frustration, and internal friction. These are not signs you're failing, they're signals that you're exactly where growth happens, on the edge of your current capabilities, stretching into the unknown. When you stop needing your progress to be loud, you enter a state of power few people ever experience. You begin to work for the work itself. You begin to pursue excellence without needing an audience. This rewires not only your brain, but your entire approach to life. Because the person who no longer needs visible success to validate their journey is the person who cannot be distracted, cannot be derailed, cannot be seduced by the noise. They become deeply locked in on their own path. And over time, their progress becomes visible, not because they forced it to be, but because it could no longer be hidden. That is the kind of success that endures, the kind that echoes long after the applause has faded. The more we examine the myth of loud success, the more we see how it distorts not only our behavior, but our sense of identity itself. When you live in a world that rewards noise, it's easy to confuse being seen with being significant. But these are not the same. Being seen is about optics. Being significant is about depth. One feeds the ego, the other feeds the soul. At a neurobiological level, the brain becomes conditioned to seek what it gets rewarded for. If you constantly reward yourself only when others acknowledge your progress, you create a fragile motivational system, one that is tethered to the mood, attention, and validation of others. This system is inherently unstable because it relies on variables you cannot control: trends, opinions, external circumstances. And when that validation dries up, as it inevitably will, the system collapses, often leaving behind confusion, emptiness, and a fractured sense of self. But when you reverse that equation, when you train your nervous system to anchor to internal cues, private victories, the small, invisible milestones, you create a radically different architecture of self. One that is robust, anti-fragile, and deeply rooted. Because the truth is, the most important work you will ever do is the work no one will ever see. The mental repetitions you do in silence, the emotional regulation you practice in private, the self-discipline you enact when the world offers you an easier path. These are the moments that carve character into the neural circuits of your brain. They do not require an audience, and they do not require applause. In fact, when progress becomes quieter, it often becomes more honest, because you're no longer performing for the world. You are practicing for yourself, and in doing so, you create the rarest kind of freedom, the freedom from needing anyone else to tell you you're on the right track. This is where the myth of loud success begins to unravel, because loud success, by its nature, is often built on fragile foundations. Performances designed for visibility, rather than structures designed for longevity. Quiet success, on the other hand, is built slowly, methodically, like the laying of deep foundations beneath the surface. It might not be glamorous in the short term, but over the long term, it creates outcomes that are unshakable. It creates a person who is not just performing success but embodying it. And perhaps that's the ultimate irony of the myth of loud success. By the time real success emerges into the light, it no longer needs to shout. It is so deeply rooted, so embodied, that it speaks for itself, and it no longer matters whether anyone else notices, because the person you have become knows exactly what they've built, and more importantly, how they built it. In a world obsessed with noise, visibility, and instant validation, it's easy to forget that the most profound progress is often invisible. The quiet work, the early mornings, the unseen struggles, the moments when no one else is watching, is where real transformation happens. Neuroscience reminds us that lasting change requires patience, repetition, and deep internal focus. It is the slow rewiring of the brain, the building of resilient habits, and the cultivation of discipline far from the spotlight. When we release ourselves from the myth that progress must be loud to matter, we reclaim power. We shift our focus inward, tethering our growth to internal standards rather than external applause. This is where true freedom lives, the freedom to evolve on your own terms, at your own pace, grounded in your own integrity. Invisible progress is not invisible because it is insignificant. It is invisible because it is deeply personal, fundamentally private, and profoundly real. And it is in this quiet victory that we find not only success but fulfillment, resilience, and the lasting foundation for a life well lived. So lock in on yourself, celebrate the invisible wins, trust the slow, quiet process, and know that by winning quietly, you are building something that no noise can ever take away.